The flickering streetlights cast long, distorted shadows across the deserted road, each pulse of yellow light a fleeting glimpse into an unnerving stillness. It was past midnight, the kind of quiet that presses in on you, amplifying the smallest sounds until they become monstrous. A lone figure, a young woman named Anya, hurried her steps, the chill in the air not entirely from the late autumn weather. Something felt off, a subtle dissonance in the familiar hum of the city that had always been a comforting lullaby. Tonight, it sounded like a held breath. Anya clutched her worn backpack tighter, her knuckles white. She was heading home, a route she'd walked 1,000 times, but tonight, even the familiar scent of damp earth and distant exhaust fumes seemed tinged with something alien, something wrong. She heard a faint scuttling sound from the alleyway to her left, a sound too heavy for a rat, too deliberate for the wind. She quickened her pace, her heart beginning to thrum against her ribs like a trapped bird. As she rounded the corner onto Maple Street, the usual scattering of parked cars seemed absent. The streetlights, usually steady beacons, flickered erratically, casting the row of houses in a disorienting strobe effect. And then she saw it, or rather, them. Emerging from the deeper shadows between houses were figures, not human, not animal, but a terrifying amalgamation of both. They moved with an unnerving fluidity, their limbs too long, their bodies unnaturally slender. Their skin, where the sparse light caught it, gleamed with a slick, dark sheen, like wet obsidian. Anya froze, a scream caught in her throat. Her mind struggled to process what her eyes were seeing. These were not hallucinations, not the product of a tired imagination. These were real, tangible horrors stepping out of the night. They made no sound, their movements eerily silent, a chilling contrast to the chaotic symphony her own panicked breathing created. One of the creatures turned its head, and Anya felt a jolt of primal fear as she realized it had no discernible face, only a smooth, elongated head that tilted with an unnerving curiosity. She finally broke free from her paralysis, turning and running, her backpack bouncing against her back. The silence of the creatures was broken by a new sound, a soft, chitinous scraping, as if they were unfolding. Anya dared a glance back. They were closer, their unnatural gait covering ground with alarming speed. This was not a nightmare. This was the beginning of the end. The news reports, the frantic whispers online, the sudden silence from the global networks, it all coalesced into a horrifying realization. The anomalies, as the brief panicked messages had called them, were no longer anomalies. They were an invasion. Panic, raw and unreasoning, threatened to consume Anya. But years of consuming sci-fi and disaster movies, a habit she'd always dismissed as pure escapism, suddenly kicked in. Her mind, despite the terror, began to sift through fragments of lore, of fictional survival strategies. If this was real, there had to be a way. If humanity was to survive, they needed more than just screams and blind flight. They needed plans. She scrambled into her apartment building, fumbling with the keys, her hands shaking. Inside, the building was eerily quiet. The usual sounds of late-night television or distant conversations were absent. She burst into her small apartment, locking the door behind her with a resounding click. She needed to think. She needed to find out what was happening. Anya turned on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The internet was a chaotic mess of fragmented reports, conspiracy theories, and outright panic. But amidst the noise, a few threads began to emerge, hints of a coordinated response, of individuals and groups scrambling to understand and combat the encroaching darkness. She stumbled upon a hidden forum, a digital refuge for those who claimed to have been tracking these entities for years, dismissed as crackpots until now. They spoke of them as Umbra, creatures of shadow and silence, drawn to fear and darkness. The forum members, a motley crew of scientists, former military personnel, and obsessive researchers, had already begun to formulate strategies based on their limited observations and the few unfortunate encounters that had been documented. They called them the 5 pillars of resistance. Anya devoured the information, her fear slowly giving way to a grim determination. This wasn't just about her survival anymore, it was about everyone. The first pillar was the Sanctuary Protocol. The Umbra, according to the forum, were drawn to large, exposed populations and areas of intense emotional distress. The forum members theorized that decentralized, self-sufficient havens, small pockets of humanity shielded from the main onslaught. These weren't grand fortresses, but rather fortified rural communities, repurposed underground bunkers, even carefully selected defensible islands. The key was to become invisible, to blend into the background, to deny the Umbra the energy they fed on. Communication would be minimal, relying on prearranged dead drops and encrypted short-range broadcasts. The more people who understood this, the more chances humanity had. Anya thought of her grandfather's old farm in the countryside, a place she hadn't visited in years. It was isolated, surrounded by dense forest. It could be a sanctuary. The second pillar was the echo disruption. The Umbra seemed to possess a form of echolocation or sensory perception that allowed them to navigate and hunt. Their movements, though silent to human ears, might be leaving some kind of trace, a resonance in the fabric of reality that they exploited. The idea here was to create noise on a fundamental level, to overwhelm their senses. This involved deploying sonic emitters, not necessarily loud, but emitting specific, chaotic frequencies designed to disorient and blind them. It also involved creating physical disruptions, controlled demolitions in non-populated areas, or even strategically deploying large reflective surfaces to scatter whatever sensory input they relied upon. The forum even mentioned experimental technologies, devices that could generate localized temporal distortions, brief hiccups in the flow of time that would make tracking impossible. Anya remembered a local radio tower on a hill overlooking the city, if it could be repurposed. The third pillar was the Lumina Offensive. While the Umbra thrived in darkness, they seemed to be weakened by intense, focused light. Not just any light, but specific wavelengths that disrupted their physical forms, causing them to recoil and even dissipate. This was the most direct offensive strategy, focusing on developing and deploying powerful light-based weaponry. Lasers, plasma projectors, even specially designed flares that burned with an unnerving intensity. The challenge was power generation and portability. The forum spoke of harnessing geothermal energy, of developing compact fusion reactors, and of creating weaponized drones equipped with these light emitters, capable of sweeping through infested areas. Anya pictured the city's towering skyscrapers, how their reflective glass might be turned into a weapon, reflecting and amplifying light into the streets below. The fourth pillar, and perhaps the most controversial, was the psionic integration. This was based on the fringe theories of latent human psychic abilities. The forum members theorized that the Umbra were vulnerable to focused mental energy, to collective consciousness. The idea was to train and amplify these nascent abilities, creating a form of psychic shield or even a weaponized mental projection. This involved meditation, telepathic linking exercises, and the development of specialized amplifiers, devices that could focus and project mental energy. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but the forum's most brilliant minds were dedicated to it. Anya, who had always dismissed her occasional moments of intuition as mere coincidence, began to consider them in a new light. Finally, the fifth pillar, the Chronos contingency. This was the ultimate fallback, a plan for when all else failed. If the Umbra were truly unstoppable, then humanity's only hope was to preserve itself across time. This involved the construction of hyper-advanced time capsules designed to withstand any catastrophe, containing not just biological samples and cultural archives, but also the knowledge and technology to rebuild. The most ambitious aspect of this contingency involved a theoretical temporal displacement device capable of sending small groups of individuals into the distant future, effectively skipping over the entire period of the Umbra's dominance. It was a grim prospect, a surrender of the present, but it offered a sliver of hope for the species' continuation. Anya spent the next few days in a state of hypervigilance, fueled by caffeine and a terrifying resolve. She used the fragmented network to connect with others who had stumbled upon the same hidden knowledge. She found a small group of survivors holed up in the old library downtown, led by a former astrophysicist named Dr. Eris Thorne, a man who radiated a calm, analytical demeanor even in the face of the encroaching chaos. They had managed to secure a significant portion of the library, its thick stone walls offering some protection, and its vast collection of knowledge a resource. Dr. Thorne, his eyes weary but his mind sharp, listened intently as Anya relayed the information from the forum. "The sanctuary protocol," he mused, stroking his chin. "It's sound. Isolation and self-sufficiency are our best bet against creatures that seem to thrive on chaos and fear. My family has a cabin in the Adirondacks. It's remote, defensible. We can gather resources, prepare it." The Lumina offensive was more challenging. Their immediate goal was to find and secure high-powered generators and any available laser technology. Anya remembered seeing a dismantled industrial laser cutter in a workshop on the outskirts of town. It was a long shot, but worth investigating. The echo disruption was already in motion, albeit on a small scale. Dr. Thorne's team had managed to repurpose some old sonar equipment, emitting a low-frequency hum that seemed to deter the creatures from their immediate vicinity. "We need more," he said, his voice tight. "We need to flood the area with discordant noise." The psionic integration was the most uncertain. A handful of individuals in their group claimed to experience heightened intuition, vivid dreams, and an unnerving awareness of the Umbra's presence. Dr. Thorne was cautiously optimistic. "We will dedicate a section of the library to this. We will study, we will practice. If there's any truth to it, it could be our ultimate advantage." The Kronos contingency remained a distant, terrifying ideal. The technology required was far beyond their current capabilities. But the idea of preserving humanity's essence, of ensuring a future, kept their spirits from completely breaking. As days turned into a week, the city outside became a symphony of distant screams and unnerving silences. The Umbra were everywhere, their presence a suffocating shroud. Anya and Dr. Thorne's group worked tirelessly, their sanctuary within the library a beacon of organized resistance. They fortified the entrances, rationed their dwindling supplies, and shared what little knowledge they had. One evening, as Anya was helping to reinforce a barricade, a chilling silence descended. It was a silence deeper than any they had experienced before, a predatory hush that preceded something terrible. Then it began, a low, guttural humming, vibrating through the very stone of the library. The Umbra were not just lurking outside, they were actively trying to breach their sanctuary. Anya could feel it too, a growing dread, a cold dread that was not entirely her own. She looked at Dr. Thorne, his face grim, his eyes fixed on the heavy oak doors of the library. Suddenly, a section of the wall nearest to them began to ripple, as if the stone itself was melting. A long obsidian limb snaked through the distortion, followed by the impossibly slender torso of an Umbra. It moved with a terrifying grace, its smooth, featureless head turning, as if sensing their presence. This was not just a breach, this was a violation. The psionic integration, though still in its infancy, kicked in with a desperate surge. Anya felt a wave of raw terror wash over her, but beneath it, a spark of defiance. She focused her mind, not on her fear, but on the image of the Umbra, on its unnatural form. A collective gasp went through the group as the Umbra recoiled, its limb retracting with a strange, jerky movement. It seemed disoriented, as if struck by an invisible force. "It's working!" Dr. Thorne exclaimed, his voice laced with a mixture of awe and urgency. "Focus, everyone! Focus on the entity!" Anya closed her eyes, picturing the Umbra, and then she imagined a blinding light, an intense, searing radiance. She felt a surge of energy, a palpable force emanating from her and from the others. The Umbra let out a soundless shriek, a distortion in the air that Anya felt more than heard. It thrashed wildly, its obsidian form seeming to flicker, to destabilize. And then, with a final shuddering convulsion, it dissolved into a pool of dark, viscous fluid that hissed and steamed on the stone floor. A wave of exhaustion washed over Anya, but it was mixed with an exhilarating triumph. They had faced it, and they had prevailed. The Lumina offensive, in its nascent psionic form, had worked. But the victory was short-lived. The humming intensified, and the ripples in the walls spread, indicating multiple points of entry. The Umbra were not deterred by the loss of one of their own. They were a swarm, a relentless tide. "We need to move," Dr. Thorne said, his voice urgent. "The library is no longer safe. We enact the secondary phase of the Sanctuary Protocol. We head for the cabins." The escape was a desperate, terrifying race against time. Anya and the remaining survivors, a fraction of the original group, navigated the dark, deserted streets, guided by the dim glow of their makeshift lanterns and the collective intuition of those who could sense the Umbra's movements. The Lumina offensive, fueled by the raw psionic energy of the survivors, provided brief bursts of clarity, repelling the creatures that dared to approach too closely. They reached the outskirts of the city, the dense forest offering a fragile shield. Anya's grandfather's farm was miles away, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. As they trekked through the woods, Anya remembered the 5 pillars, the strategies devised by desperate minds. Sanctuary, disruption, light, psionics, and the ultimate contingency. They had relied on the first 4, adapting them to their desperate circumstances. The journey was brutal. They encountered Umbra at every turn, their silent pursuit a constant gnawing terror. But each encounter strengthened their resolve, their psionic abilities growing with each desperate act of defense. They learned to anticipate the creature's movements, to feel their presence like a cold dread in their bones. When they finally reached the old farmhouse, it was a scene of weary relief. The air was cleaner, the oppressive silence of the city replaced by the gentle rustling of leaves. They had made it. They had survived. As Anya stood on the porch, looking back towards the distant, silent city, she knew this was not the end. The Umbra were still out there, a pervasive darkness. But they had learned, they had adapted. Humanity, in its most desperate hour, had found its resilience. The 5 pillars, once mere theoretical strategies, had become their shield, their weapon, and their hope for a future, however uncertain. The battle for Earth had just begun, and in the heart of the wilderness, a new, quiet resistance was taking root, a testament to the enduring spirit of humanity against the encroaching, silent horror. The night was long, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Anya felt a flicker of dawn on the horizon, a testament to the resilience born from the darkest of fears.